Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today we are in Elmira, New York. This is my first time here. This is a very historic city. This is the grave and former home of Mark Twain, one of the most popular authors, humorists, pop culture figures. Actually, he was credited as being the first pop culture figure. So we're gonna see his grave, and we're also gonna see where he wrote a lot of those memorable stories. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. On the grounds of Elmira College, because there's something very important related to Mark Twain's history that they have here on the grounds we can see. Check out some of the architecture of Elmira College. Kind of fascinating because it looks a lot like the Hartford home that Samuel and Livy end up building and living in. 25-room mansion. All right, right on the campus of Elmira College, where his father-in-law was a trustee and one of the advisors, and his wife Livy was a student here. Mark Twain's study, built on the East Hill in 1874, given to Elmira College in 1952. He wrote Tom Sawyer and other novels in this study while summering in Elmira. So they moved it over here because he had a big residence here called Quarry Farm, and that was like kind of the family home. Basically what happened was, when he met his wife, his father-in-law was very wealthy and a big deal in this town, and he gifted Samuel Clemens basically ownership in a newspaper. And when his father-in-law died, they ended up selling that and coming back here and living on Quarry Farm. So they mention here on their historical placard, which is great if you don't know the story, how he ended up in Elmira. It was actually when he was 32 years old. He was on a train ride and he saw the image of Olivia Langdon while traveling on the Quaker City steamer. He was on this ship to do a report, and while he was traveling, he met Olivia's younger brother, Charles, and the two became friends, and Charles showed Samuel a picture of his older sister, who was 22, and Samuel Clemens kind of fell in love with her. In fact, he would describe her by saying she looked like a girl and a lady at the same time. Apparently, because the family was so wealthy and they were big socialites in this area, really no one was a fan of him joining the family. And so he had to court her for 2 years, sending like 200 letters. And eventually, what I read was that her father said, okay, before I let this happen, I need some character references. And so he told Samuel Clemens to write his friends and get character references. And when he wrote them, the responses from one were that he should be hanged. One of the other responses said that Samuel Clemens would find a drunkard's grave. And Livy's father said, is there no one that will stand for you and say a kind word about you? And eventually it was Livy's brother, Charles, who stood up for Samuel and said, I will speak up for him. I will say that I believe he will be a good husband to our sister. So online it says the study's open. I'm hoping it is. It says that beginning in 1870 and continuing till 1889, Sam and Livy and their growing family spent months in Elmira, where they stayed with Livy's adopted older sister, Susan Crane, and her husband at the Quarry Farm. Quarry Farm is actually here in town. And Samuel Clemens would say, by his own admission, that living in Hartford was nice, but there were a lot of distractions. And at least coming to Quarry Farm, he could work and pile up manuscripts and things like that. So in 1874, Susan Crane had this small study built for him above the main house. And it was a very unusual design that you'll see, but it kind of looks like their home in Hartford, and that's where it came about. So it was said that he wrote Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Adventures of Huck Finn, Life on the Mississippi, a Connecticut in King Arthur's Court, and he also did an interview in the Chicago Tribune in 1886 about it. So online it says that it's open. I don't know if we'll actually be able to get in or if we can just look through the windows, but that is so cool that it remained. I think they had a fire out there from what I recall, and that's why it had to be moved. They were able to save this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know the quarry farm has been rebuilt. Now here they have a headstone to his beloved Clara Livy Clemens. They had 4 kids. First, a son who died very young, and they both fell into a depression, except Livy's way of dealing with the depression is she didn't leave, didn't want to go out and do anything. He was the exact opposite. He took like a big vacation and got drunk and entertained people. And I know it sounds kind of in bad taste, but you know, everybody's different. Everybody has a different way of coping with things. So in the end, he would basically outlive all but one daughter. So they do tours 10 a.m. So I might be able to actually hopefully take the tour because we're pretty close to that time. Actually, it's such a small room, I'm not sure if waiting the extra 2 hours would be worth it. We'll see. I might come back. It's just a little writing room with like a donation desk. That is really cool to see though. Wow. To see the windows he would have looked out. I mean, he's not seeing the same stuff, but that's amazing. He was a pretty fascinating guy. I mean, especially because, you know, when he started writing and everything, there was no such thing as like subscription books, and they kind of invented that. They got people to sign up when his books came out to where they would just, people that were not normally readers were now buying his books and they were in their homes. So that's why I said he became known as like the first pop culture figure, because basically he had done a myriad of jobs. You know, growing up in Hannibal, Missouri by the riverboats, that would, you know, be a fantasy of his. So when he got old enough to go out on his own, he actually started in the print business as a kind of a print assistant or doing the typeset for printing and everything. And he would work in many different cities, but really wasn't making that much money. So he went south, became a riverboat captain, and he loved that because he said he felt like that was really like the only job that you could do where you felt free and you didn't have anybody over top of you. But then the bottom fell out because of the war and everything, the Civil War. And so he went and joined the Confederate Army and then actually basically just took off. He deserted them. So it's kind of crazy that he would be a Confederate supporter, and then eventually in his life, he would become one of the strongest voices for human rights. When he was living in San Francisco and he was seeing how Chinese people were treated, he would write about that. He would just kind of break apart all the social norms. He would fight against slavery, and then eventually become best friends with Ulysses S. Grant, who was the head of the Union Army. And even in this town, while Ulysses S. Grant was dying and was in tremendous debt, needed money, Mark Twain convinced him to write his autobiography. And when Ulysses S. Grant became too sick to complete it, Mark Twain stopped everything he was doing, went by his bedside, dictated everything, finished the book, and they turned it in 4 days before Ulysses S. Grant died. Grant family ended up selling the rights, selling the books, and they made $500,000 and got out of debt thanks to Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. The reason that he chose the name Mark Twain, he had used so many aliases in his writing ever before that. And the whole reason he did that was because, as you can imagine, for the times, a lot of the things that he was saying were not real popular, and he was trying to make his way as a writer in newspapers. So he would use fake names originally just so nobody knew who he was. But then, you know, he eventually settled on Mark Twain and would use that as his main writing name and his personality. So a lot of times throughout his life, he would go and act like a fool. He was a major drunk for a long time, but he would go out and act crazy, and people, you know, would say, oh, he should be ashamed of himself. And his family would say he's really just being the Mark Twain character. That's kind of like the way he sees it, and that's what he knows people want to see out of him. So he was actually said to be the worst and the best of all humanity. Actually, let's go walk over here. I see a statue, and I think that's to his wife. When you dig into his story, it's pretty fascinating because, I mean, the guy at one point, his brother went off when they discovered gold off to the west. And so Samuel Clemens went to Virginia City, began writing there and popping off his mouth in the papers. And one of the townspeople challenged him to a duel, and he accepted. And then he found out that the guy was a crack shot and basically just skipped out of town. So that's why I say when his references came back and he said he should be hanged, that's probably what he was referencing, that he skipped out on a duel. He'd skipped out on debts and things like that. He would just work his way all up and down the coast. He went out to Hawaii when it was the Sandwich Islands and wrote about his experiences out there. And then when he came back, that's where he kind of discovered that he could go on these lecturing tours because people like to hear him spin yarns and tell stories. In fact, when he was out in the gold mine, he bought a gold mine with some other guys, and they said he was the lazy one. They were always out working, and he'd be sitting in a bar spinning tales and telling yarns and all that. So, you know, it was kind of par for the course what he would eventually do. So when he started doing those lecturing series and tours, they were immensely popular, and he basically became famous for being famous. His wife was a godsend to him. There's no reports, you know, of him cheating on her or anything like that. In fact, almost to the contrary, even though he would leave her for stretches to do the lecture tours and things like that. This is the statue to Olivia Langdon Clemens, his wife, class of 1864. She was always in his corner. He loved her tremendously and was absolutely crushed when he learned of her illness, and that he actually received a telegram. He's having an otherwise beautiful day, he said, and then received a telegram saying that she had passed. Very sad. She did a lot as far as her belief in him, catering to his whims, kind of doing the things that he wanted, living where he wanted. She was as supportive of a wife as anyone could have. So it's nice that she's remembered here. And then right across from her, they actually have a statue to Mark Twain. I mean, Samuel Clemens. It's got some of his writings on the pedestal. Now let's go out to the gravesite. Walking back to my car, I saw this and I was like, what is that historical placard? And it says, Paddy's Pig. Paddy's Pig freely roamed the streets of Elmira in the mid to late 1800s. The prints in this walkway are a reminder of our city's vibrant history. Oh yeah, little hoof prints. Even Mark Twain would appreciate that. Mark Twain once said, if Christ were here today, one thing he would not be is a Christian. There's a plaque by the graveside that says that he died in Redding, Connecticut, April 21st, 1910. He died at his home, Stormfield, in Redding, Connecticut. Beside him on his bed lay a beloved book, Carlyle's The French Revolution, A History. And near the book, his glasses pushed away a few hours before. He was in his 75th year. His daughter Clara and her husband Osip and the humorous biographer Albert Bigelow Paine had been by bed waiting for the end. On Saturday, April 23rd, the hearse was brought to the brick church where simple service was offered by Reverend Dr. Van Dyke, and Dr. Twitchell. 3 of 4,000 people passed in review. The coffin was then brought to Elmira by rail. Under a tent on a grassy slope of the Langdon plot in Woodlawn Cemetery, with rain beating fiercely against the canvas cover, a little group of mourners silently watched as the body of Samuel Clemens was lowered into an evergreen-lined grave beside those of his wife and children. Pastor of the Park Church and close friend conducted the ceremony. Reverend Samuel Eastman, and Mark Twain's first pilgrimage was at its end. Tonight he lies sleeping under a grave piled high with flowers, the tributes of loving friends from far and near. All right, there's a sign right here that points to Mark Twain being over here, but what I want to do is I kind of want to go from here, because the reason he's here is because his loving wife Livy's family was a big part of this town, the Langdon family, and that's the Langdon family plot right there. You can see all the headstones lining it up on both sides. He's a very wealthy man, supposed to be a very good man, very fair man. So right behind him is Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. I don't know whether he preferred Samuel or if he liked both. You can see on there that it says Mark Twain at the very top. So here's the grave of Clara Clemens. We saw a headstone over by the study for her. That was one of his daughters. It says, "Goodbye, darling, until we meet again." And here's her husband. And then if we come up here, we have other members of the Clemens family. Jean Lambton Clemens, a most dear daughter, her desolate father sets this stone. It says, "After life's fitful fever, she sleeps well." I believe she was the daughter that they said had, I think she had epilepsy. She had really bad case of epilepsy where she would have seizures like 3 or 4 times a day, and she had to kind of have someone supervising her. And while I think all the family was in Europe other than her, she went to visit their home in Hartford, Connecticut, and died there while she was there. Here's Olivia. That was also his daughter. And then here in this grave repose the ashes of Olivia Langdon, the beloved and lamented wife of Samuel Clemens, who reverently raised this stone to her memory. Elmira, November 27th, 1845. Florence, Italy, June 5th, 1904. Here's the grave of her husband, Mr. Samuel Clemens, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, also known by his pen name as Mark Twain. November 30th, 1835 to April 21st, 1910. A very amazing and interesting life, to say the least. Humorist, author, all those things, but he also loved technology. He ended up, it's kind of crazy, he just was told about telephone early on and was actually the first person to have a telephone in his home, and yet when he was given the opportunity to invest in the company, he refused. He ended up investing in typeset machines because he originally had been in print, and the typeset machines were very complicated, and even though they were ahead of their time and they did a great job when they worked, they apparently broke down constantly to the point where they were going to have investors come to potentially give money to help the project, and the machine would break down 30 minutes before they got there. So he ended up losing everything and pretty much was bankrupt. He pretty much had lost it all. And it was a socialite that said, here's what you should do. You should write something and put it in the paper and tell everyone that you're gonna pay this back, that you're not gonna declare bankruptcy and you're not gonna use that legal loophole. And so that's exactly what he did. He went out and did these more and more of these lecturing tours and made all the money back to pay all that off, pay all of his debt off. But that is so sad because he had made so much money. Like I said, his books were really popular because they were able to do them by subscription. And also, he was one of the first people, if not the first person, to use his face and his name to market products. Like there were Mark Twain cigars and all kinds of stuff that he would loan his name to. He actually had something called the self-adhering photograph stamp album, like a memorabilia book that he had invented. And he eventually, one of the crowning achievements of his life is that Oxford University gave him an honorary degree and a robe. So he would, if there were any big events that he was going to, he would always wear that robe, including his daughter's wedding. He showed up and wore that robe. So there's one really peculiar part of his life. As he got older, apparently when he got into his 70s, he started befriending 10-year-old to 16-year-old little girls. It was a crazy thing because there was talk of like where it would start with like a fan letter, and some, a little girl would tell him that she was a fan of his writing and he would write back, whatever. And it would almost get to the point where it would seem flirtatious. But then later on in some of his writings, he mentions that one of the biggest things that he felt like he missed, or one of the biggest empty parts of his life, his heart, was that he never had grandkids, which was true. He had one daughter who survived to be able to have a grandchild. However, the grandchild wasn't born until after Samuel Clemens died. But there was this weird period where he would call them angelfish, and he would always want to have these young girls over. He had a home called, I think it was called Stormfield, and he would have them come, and he would actually call that place his aquarium. And it just seemed almost creepy and bizarre. But then when he kind of described that missing of youth, and he would write in his books about how, or why he thought Tom Sawyer was, why it touched so many souls, because it reminded the adults of what they loved about their youth. And so I think when you take that into consideration, there was never any reports of him with any kind of, misdoings or anything like that. It was just kind of a bizarre thing where he had these stages of his life where he didn't want to be with anybody but these little girls that he called angelfish. And, but his daughter apparently put a stop to it. When she found out it was going on, she basically told him, hey, no more kids over to the house, and like locked up the house. And speaking of that grandchild that he never got to know and he never got those fun experiences with, this was Nina Clemens. This was his little granddaughter, born August 18th, 1910, where he would end up passing on April 21st of 1910. Just missed her. He said one of the things that always fascinated him was that people thought or treated Huck Finn as though it was a child's book. That kind of astounded him. He didn't know that for a long time, that people looked at it that way. Where now, there are some places that actually ban the book, but there was a lot of writing in there that was not friendly to children. It was a lot of deep subjects and a lot of, dishonest behavior, a lot of, almost things that they thought could promote mischievousness. But it's gone down in history as one of the most important writings of all time, and we saw the study of it today, the study where he wrote it. I think that's pretty amazing. Samuel Clemens' story is so deep and so big, and a lot of it not even exaggerated, but he used to like to write a lot of stuff that wasn't true to capture the imagination. So he's just a really interesting, fascinating figure in American history, because I think one of the things that keeps people going is having this hope that you can do anything. And he did. He tried so many things, got to do so many occupations and do things that he had always wanted to, and then lost everything that he had earned from it and then gained it all back. Also helping to secure a hero's legacy in General Grant by writing that autobiography, telling his story of the Civil War, telling his story of the presidency. It was a big part of history that was able to be captured, and it was one of the most important autobiographies of its day. So thanks to Samuel Clemens for being the catalyst to get that written and to help finish it for General President Grant. Thank you everyone for watching. Have a great night from Elmira, New York. Goodbye.